Well, I said yesterday that I thought the odds favoured Max. I have to confess, I didn't imagine it was going to work out the way it did. I think the thing that astonishes me still is how bad Max's start was from the pole, the clean side of the grid, on soft tyres. And he didn't get the lead into turn one. And thereafter, Lewis drove, and Lewis made a great start, I've got to say, made a great start on the medium tyres. Lewis thereafter drove an immaculate race in every dimension. And whilst they were sort of sparring and with no traffic around them and it was one-on-one, Max was consistently 3 to 4 kilometres an hour quicker on the straight, and Lewis was quicker on every lap that he drove until he got into a situation where it was slightly different tyre wear and tyre situations for both of them. So in terms of Lewis's drive today, absolutely superb. And then he had to defend as well. I'm going to go on about Lewis a little bit initially because I want to paint the picture of what Max Verstappen beat today. He then had to deal, of course, with Sergio Perez. I don't know about you guys, but I always imagined that Sergio was going to be the biggest problem for Lewis going into turn one, even that he was probably going to be very near him and might just tap him at the rear, as I suggested yesterday. But it wasn't that. It was coming up to Perez, who'd stayed out there very long first run on the soft tyre and going very slowly. And Lewis 3 times basically passed Perez, and 3 times Sergio pretty aggressive repass. I think the crowd loved it, but it was all happening at really slow speed. I mean, in those one lap, in those 3 passes, Lewis lost 8 seconds to Max. So Lewis had to put up with that again. Then when that settled, he was pulling away from Max again. When Max got onto the hard tyre, and it was basically a one-stop strategy race, as we said yesterday, he was about 0.2 seconds of a lap slower than Lewis, again, match for match. And then, of course, there were the other outside factors. The first of which was a virtual safety car. Not really sure why it came out. It had something to do with Giovinazzi stopping in the Alpha, but he didn't seem to be on the track. Anyway, it was quite a long virtual safety car. And at that moment, Red Bull brought Max in and Mercedes kept Lewis out. And I think that was the right call, because had they brought Lewis in, he's leading the race, Max may well have stayed out and got the lead. And that's what they didn't want to do, because they didn't need Lewis near Max, because potentially if they touched and both went out, the World Championship was there for Max. So that's what Mercedes were always thinking about. And in that context, it was always better to be P2 on the road rather than P1. It's not the sort of thing you normally bring into the variables to play with. But being second is always better in that situation. But it isn't the case with the safety car, because with the safety car, of course, the field bunches up at the restart and forget about gaps completely. So the interesting thing is that Mercedes, again, didn't bring Lewis in right at the end in that safety car. And I think they did that because they were in this mode of not relinquishing track position to Max, because they just didn't want the two to be near one another, or Lewis to have to fight Max if Max stayed out. The problem was that Michael Masi, the race director, was, I would imagine, under immense pressure in those last minutes when they're out behind the safety car to ensure that this race, this World Championship, this title fight didn't end under a safety car, and with an anticlimax, if you like. All this relates to Article 48.1.2, which states that any cars that have been lapped by the leader will be required to pass the cars on the lead lap and the safety car. In other words, before the race can be restarted, any unlapped cars must pass the leader and get back onto the same lap again. We've had that rule in Formula One for several years now. And so Mercedes, quite rightly, felt that by the time those 5 cars had passed Lewis and got back into formation, the race would probably be over. It wasn't really a gamble. It was, that was the evidence in front of them. But then it all changed when Michael got on the radio to Mercedes to confirm that the cars between Lewis and Max, the lap cars, would not be required to pass Lewis. And so either way, it was going to work for Mercedes, because then there was 1 lap to go. Max still had to find a way through those 4 or 5 lap cars in front of him, and he probably wasn't going to be able to do that even on his new set of soft tyres. But then, and this is where the contentious issue now lies, and Mercedes have put in a protest about this, Michael then got on the radio to tell those 5 drivers to pass Lewis, so that Max was right behind Lewis now. But what he didn't do was tell 3 other lap cars in the race to do the same thing. And so Daniel Ricciardo, Lance Stroll and Mick Schumacher were not given that call. And that for sure is what Mercedes will be talking about. Now, if this was any other race other than a championship decider, I'm pretty sure that there would be a major issue here. But because this is a championship decider, and because all the confetti has gone up and the champagne and Max is now the world champion, it's very unlikely that anything will happen. And so that's why there's this strange feeling after this race. But I think it's also the case that although it was all down to that last lap, the last race, the last lap, in reality, it's been a really long year. And if Mercedes truly want to look at how they lost this championship, it isn't a call that maybe caught them unexpectedly here in Abu Dhabi by Michael Masi. It isn't the 8 seconds that Lewis lost to Sergio Perez. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. Perez going so slowly, just ridiculous. And every time Lewis got near him, he almost had him off. I think if they look deeply into the mirror, intensely, it'll be, we lost the championship because we didn't have as good a car as the Red Bull, certainly for the first half of the year. So in that way, you look at it, it's got to be Adrian Newey persevered with the high rate philosophy all these years, and eventually now he's won the championship. And I think Mercedes, with all the other stuff they've got going on and the budget and everything else, never open their minds to building an Adrian Newey car for 2021. Partly because 2022 is a whole new Formula One anyway, and there's so much work to do, and they had a car that won yet another championship. And I think that's a function of why they lost this year. You can't say they could have done it any better, perhaps. And I think they certainly got a big help from Pirelli halfway through the year with a stiffer rear. But there's no question in my mind that this championship belongs as much to Adrian and his team, designers, engineers at Red Bull, and to Jonathan Wheatley and the guys on the ground who make these great calls, as it does to Max, who's driven brilliantly all year, given where he's come from, given who he is, and given how good he is. I mean, he's right up there with Lewis. The interesting thing is that he wasn't as quick as Lewis. Having lost the start, he made a bit of a suicidal plunge at the end of the straight on the first lap. A lot more grip under braking. He got the toe from Lewis, went down the inside. Lewis braked pretty late for Lewis, and he's on the racing line, and Max goes down the inside. And you can see he's thinking again, it is, look, if we touch, championship's over and I'm world champion. And he goes in and doesn't even make an attempt to turn the wheel to the left for the hairpin until he's 2/3 of the way through the corner, and Lewis goes off and continues to hold the lead. And at that point, Jonathan Wheatley got twice on the radio, I think, to Michael to say, this is completely wrong. How come Lewis is still leading the race? We made a clean pass. Well, it wasn't a clean pass. You make a clean pass if you take the corner and you're on the inside. You don't make a clean pass by just going straight on and then turning the wheel at the last minute. And that's, that was... I mean, that's the bad side of Red Bull. There's a lot of that going on. We were robbed sort of thing, but it was over-aggressive and on borderline acceptable driving anyway, in my view. And that's not only Max, that's the whole thing at Red Bull in 2021. It's Max, it's his dad, Jos, who's always been an aggressive guy. It's the Nelson PK influence coming in, on a personal side with Max. And Nelson, we know about Nelson. And it's also the whole Christian Horner Helmut Marko thing, which is, Max Verstappen is a better racing driver than Lewis Hamilton. Yeah, okay. That's what they think. And I probably sound a little bit down at the moment. I'm down because it wasn't a straight fight, in my view. It was an incredibly nail-biting, exhausting race to watch. And it's kind of odd when the guy that's dominated the race, made a great start from the dirty side of the grid on hard tyres, loses it on the last lap, not because he's made any mistakes at all. And that's what this race has to be seen as from Lewis's point of view. I think the other interesting point about all this is that Max Verstappen seems to be a much more popular driver now than Lewis Hamilton, and Red Bull seem to be a lot more popular than Mercedes. I say popular, I'm kind of just, going by the noise out there, the white noise out there on the internet, the grandstands, everything else. I mean, you don't hear Max getting booed very much, you hear Lewis getting booed a lot. Why is that? I have absolutely no idea. I don't see anything in Lewis that deserves a boo at all. Equally, I see a lot in Max that's to be acclaimed. And so I think that is something that's been a difficult thing for Lewis and Mercedes to deal with. And I think they've done a really good job. If you bear in mind that pressure alone, they've done a really good job fighting that as well. So, yeah, I mean, I'm recording this very soon after the race. The podium ceremony is still on, and I feel kind of numb. I think it's great that Max is world champion. He deserved it, and he will win more world championships. And I've been saying he's a potential world champion since the day he was in at Toro Rosso, let alone Red Bull. And congratulations to Jos and to everybody in the Verstappen family, because they've done an immense job. But I also think Lewis has done an incredible job. And to me, the much maligned Lewis Hamilton now, it's kind of weird that you've got people like Horner saying he's not as good as Max Verstappen. I think he proved today that he's every bit as good as Max Verstappen, if not better than Max. He really drove well on those medium tyres at the start of the race to pull away from Max on the soft tyre. And I can imagine what Lewis is feeling. I suppose that's why I'm feeling a bit odd, because I think, you cannot take the human element out of this. And I can only imagine what Lewis must be feeling now, completely and utterly gutted, having driven the perfect race to beat this amazingly quick racing driver in this beautiful Red Bull car, which started on the soft tyre from the pole, and he did everything he needed to do to win it, and yet he lost it on the last lap due to some, if you like, bureaucratic mess. So, yeah, I'll have more thoughts, I think, going forward from here, but that's my initial reaction to this race. Congratulations to Max. He's a complete star, and he'll be a very worthy world champion. I think he'll be a very good world champion too, in the sense that he will bring Formula One to a new crowd, to a new audience, and he's a driver. He's a human being of great quality, and he's a human being who loves the sport. And I think that intensity will be obvious in his reign as champion. I think for Lewis, it's a really interesting situation now, because he isn't world champion anymore. He won 7 and he almost won 8. I suppose at this point we should also think of Michael. Lewis got so near to breaking Michael's record and he hasn't done it. Will he have another chance in 2022? Of course he will, because he's racing for Mercedes, but it's a very, very different Formula One in 2022. And I think the cars will be a lot closer. There'll be less difference between a Mercedes and a Red Bull and a Ferrari next year. Well, it should be in theory. No, take Ferrari out of that, because it's still the same engines, isn't it? But Red Bull and Mercedes will still be very, very close. So he may not have as good a chance as this again to win his 8th championship. But in closing, I just got to say, I think any racer with real feel in his veins would be feeling for Lewis right now, and any racer who enjoys watching a fast, aggressive, on-the-limit racing driver will be very pleased that Max Verstappen has won the World Championship. So congrats to him. Congrats to Red Bull and Honda. Shouldn't forget Honda pulling out of Formula One now as a factory team. Reminds me of the conversation, as brief as it was, I had with Helmut Marko when they were still with Renault engines, Red Bull that is. We were in Malaysia, and Honda were going nowhere with McLaren at that point, and I waited in line to have a long 3-second discussion with Helmut Marko. And I said, Helmut, just from my own experience at Williams, you guys should switch to Honda immediately. There'll be a bit of a learning curve, but you'll do a much better job of managing Honda and turning it into a winning engine. And he said, this is the most ridiculous decision, ridiculous idea I've ever heard in my life. No, out of my office. So that was that. And it didn't happen for another 18 months, but what can you say? So yeah, congrats to the winners, commiserations to the losers. Were they losers? They just didn't win it, did they? Lewis and Mercedes, they lost it on that last lap of the last race. See you soon.